Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. I'm here today with my father, author and founder of the Moss Report, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ben.
So, I understand that you have some information to share with us about a very humble food ingredient plant, parsley. So, what can you tell us about parsley? I'm assuming it has something to do with cancer. Am I right?
That's a fair assumption when you're talking to me. So basically, the chemical in question is apigenin, Apigenin, and it is found in a number of different vegetables, such as lettuce, but the main source is parsley. And in fact, the most concentrated source in the entire vegetable kingdom are parsley flakes, such as you would find on almost any spice rack. But most people don't give parsley the respect that it's due. And a lot of fancy restaurants, at least back in the day, would put a little sprig of parsley on the plate, but then you'd eat the steak and you'd, toss the parsley. It was just a decoration. But in fact, parsley is a very, very powerful food and really contains this important and emerging anti-cancer element, apigenin.
So, when I think of dried parsley, I think of a jar that I have kept in my spice rack for I don't know how many years that it's
Yeah.
been sitting there. That would be the last thing that I would think would have any nutritional value. It's just dried out, it's old. I guess the first question I have is wouldn't that dried parsley lose its qualities, its healthfulness from just the result of aging and being in the cupboard for so long?
I think it does slowly over time. I just bought some uh, a new bottle of 2 ounces of dried parsley, and it's not expensive. It's really just a very few bucks. But the color of it is quite different from the color of the stuff that I've been using for years. You just can't use it up. I mean, if you buy in the 2 ounce amount, so I'm throwing out the old one. I got to about 2/3 of the way down in it, and I would just guess that the color is the best indication you have of the freshness and therefore the amount of apigenin in it. If you really want to get the apigenin, you should have both the dried and the fresh parsley. If you can get organic, so much the better.
Now, there are different varieties. There's the flat leaf parsley. I guess that's the Italian parsley. And then there's the curly parsley, which is the garnish. Are they roughly the same in terms of their apigenin content?
The roughly, so I think it's just a matter of taste which one you would get. We prefer the flat leaf Italian kind. I think it's easier to cook with, and maybe it tastes a tad better. Both of them are going to be fantastic sources of apigenin.
So, the question that we generally get from our audience is how much should I take? And usually there's two questions. One is if someone's taking it for prevention, and the other is if you're actively battling a diagnosis.
And we do have an answer for that. And the answer comes from a clinical trial that we'll talk about. In the clinical trial, the people were getting 10 milligrams of pure apigenin. If you translate that amount of apigenin into doses of parsley, the amount of chopped fresh parsley would be about 1 tablespoon twice per day, or it would be 1 teaspoon of the dried parsley flakes and twice per day. And that would provide the amount of apigenin that was given in the clinical trial in Germany that we'll talk about.
So that seems like should be fairly easy to incorporate that amount of parsley or parsley flakes into one's diet.
That's very doable. In the Middle East, people eat tabbouleh salad, and they sometimes consume what we in the West would consider large amounts of parsley at one sitting. I can say with firsthand experience that it's delicious, a delicious dish. and it can even be prepared in a low carbohydrate way. So people in many parts of the world eat a lot more parsley than just 1 teaspoon or 1 tablespoon. And it doesn't seem to have any negative effects. It's a vegetable like any other vegetable, but I'm not aware of studies, showing a dose response curve, as it were. The overall picture with where Apigenin stands in the scientific literature, it has been summarized in 2022 by East Indian scientists, and they found 25 studies that were focused on the anti-cancer effects of Apigenin, the quote-unquote main ingredient in parsley, on various cancer types, including liver, prostate, pancreas, lung. Almost every kind of cancer has been studied vis-a-vis Apigenin. And their conclusion was Apigenin reduces tumor volume, tumor weight, tumor number, and tumor load very significantly in all of the scientific studies done.
Wow.
And it exerts anti-tumor effects mainly by inducing apoptosis or programmed cell death and or cell cycle arrest, which is sort of how some chemotherapy works, but there's no known toxicity to parsley. So their conclusion is our analysis, no surprise, suggests that Apigenin has potential anti-cancer effects against various cancers, and they have certain reservations about the quality of some of the studies and so forth, but they of course call for further research to evaluate the potential of Apigenin as an adjuvant for cancer treatment. Adjuvant meaning an added element, something that can be added to other treatments. It's written in a typically scientifically cautious way, but I think it shows an outstanding potential for this humble plant and this humble ingredient to have a major effect in cancer. So that's the overall picture of the science. I don't see any sign of any bias into. I think their independence can be assumed.
Nobody's making any money off of it.
You can't really make very much. You won't make a killing.
There's no parsley
Uh,
lobby.
big big parsley is not involved in this study.
Uh, when I think about cooking with ingredients like parsley, I worry that when I cook with certain foods, maybe I'm losing the healthfulness.
Most things, I think, lose potency when you heat them, and you do want to get them also in a raw form. And like I made a meal last night. I I bought a bunch of parsley in the store, and then I took more than a tablespoon. I'd say that each of us, my wife and I, got 2 tablespoons worth, and I just chopped it up and sprinkled it on the food that we were eating with olive oil, and down it went. It was fine, actually. If you get used to it, it has sort of a little bit of the bitter principle that's been sort of ruled out of Western cooking, much to our detriment, I believe. A lot of healthy things have a bit of bitterness to them. A lot of us are not used to that taste because the food has been sweetened to such a degree. So it might take a little adjusting to get used to it, but you work it in to your diet, and then it becomes just part of your routine. So I think however you can get it into your system will be good. And I'm not sure that 10 milligrams of Apigenin is the right amount. It may be more than that. The reason I picked on the 10 milligrams of Apigenin is because that's what was used in the clinical trial. Yeah.
I guess the question that I think of when we talk about a substance like parsley is, should someone go on an all parsley diet? I mean, is that going to cure them of their cancer? Or is it really just one of these things that maybe is better in moderation?
Most things are better in moderation, and we have no evidence that megadoses of parsley would be beneficial. When I visited the Middle East, I had tabbouleh salads that quite surprising to me because my idea of tabbouleh from America was mostly grain, like bulgur wheat, with a little bit of parsley added. But when I got to the Middle East, it was a parsley salad with a little bit of grain. And actually, you could, if you wanted to, you could substitute chopped pecans for the grain if you're
Oh,
on a no grain or very low carb
oh,
diet,
that sounds good.
and put in some extra virgin olive oil. That's a fantastic choice. And I never have heard or read of any health scares around excess parsley. What we're talking about is a lifestyle. What we're advocating is very similar in some respects to the so called Mediterranean diet, and parsley is certainly a part of that. I'm not saying, though, that one part of that diet is going to substitute for the whole. That would be excess expectations, I would say. One of the leitmotifs of our series of videos and of my entire 50-year career has been the gap between what the science shows and what common sense would dictate and what actually gets done in the scientific community. So it's, in a way, it's not surprising that there is only one clinical trial on this. In fact, I was overjoyed to find one. I wasn't expecting to find one because there is this tremendous gap between the the promise of natural agents, food elements, diets, things very low on the profitability scale, and what actually gets done in science, because the cost of doing clinical trials is enormous, and the profit to be derived from natural ways of fighting cancer is relatively small. So there's the so-called valley of death, which is the gap that once you've proven something has value and promise, if it's a natural agent, it can't quite struggle through this desert of non-funding that comes after you've proven the thing. So this is the persistent problem within medicine, I would say, trying to function in a world that's driven by profit. And these most promising things that most appeal to our viewers, are not really taken to the full limit in terms of exploration. It has been calculated by people at Tufts University who study this as their lifetime career that the present day cost of developing a new drug is over $1 billion. Yeah.
So nobody's pumping $1 billion into the study and approval of a parsley based drug. And why would you even do that? And you're not going to be
That's
able
right.
to sell it because you can just eat parsley, right? So
Right.
I think that that's self-explanatory as to why those studies don't happen. But you said you did find a clinical trial. Can you tell us about it?
I found one, so I'll walk you through this, and of course we'll link to
Excellent.
this. It was published in 2008 in the World Journal of Gastroenterology. The title of the paper is Prospective Cohort Comparison of Flavonoid Treatment in Patients with Resected Colorectal Cancer to Prevent Recurrence. And the authors were four German doctors, and they were at one of whom the first author is Harold Hounch, who has since retired. I've looked him up, and he was a an internist in a hospital in Germany. Then there was somebody from the Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg, which is considered sort of the National Cancer Institute of Germany. And there was a clinical pharmacologist. We even know who the peer reviewer of the article was. It was Walter Longo, professor, probably chairman, at Department of Surgery, Yale University School of Medicine. So there were 87 patients in total, and 36 of them had resected colon cancer. It had been successfully operated upon. And 51 patients had polyp removal. And these were then divided into two groups. So one group were treated with the mixture of Apigenin and EGCG from green tea, and they were compared with a matched control group of 56 patients. And then they were observed for 3 to 4 years by colonoscopies or physical inspection of the colon and by questionnaires. Of 87 patients enrolled in the study, 36 had resected colon cancer. 29 of these patients had colonoscopies. Among the supplement treated patients who had resected colon cancer, of whom there were 14, there were no cancer recurrences, and one benign growth called an adenoma developed. In contrast, the cancer recurrence rate of the 15 matched untreated controls was 20%, 3 of the 15, and adenomas or benign tumors evolved in 4, 27%. So the combined recurrence rate for neoplasia, meaning new growths, cancer plus benign growths, was 7% or 1 out of 14 in the supplement treated patients and 47%, 7 of 15 in the control group. And so it went from, there was a 40% greater incidence of unwanted new growths, cancerous or non-cancerous, in the group that didn't get the supplement versus those who got the supplement. But it almost obliterated the odds of there being a recurrence of colon cancer in this particular group. So the very cautious conclusion is sustained long-term treatment with a flavonoid mixture could reduce the recurrence rate of colon neoplasia or new growths in patients with resected colon cancer. The results here speak for themselves.
Would we have confidence in saying that this is likely to have similar effects in other things, or is it more or less digestive tract cancer sort of related?
I have confidence that it would apply to many kinds of cancer because the mechanism of action, as best as we understand it, is common to many kinds of cancer. There are at least 10 characteristics of cancers in general. These are discussed in the very famous paper by Hanahan and Weinberg on the nature of cancer. And the Apigenin addresses some of these, like the programmed cell death and the cell cycle arrest. These are not characteristics per se of colon cancer. So I have confidence that it would also be effective in other cancers, but I don't know that for a fact because this is the only clinical trial I could find. And there aren't many, if any, clinical trials currently underway on Apigenin and cancer. If you look in clinicaltrials.gov, which is the world's largest repository of data on what's going on. But these results, although they're highly encouraging, they don't surprise me. This is sort of what I would expect to see. Even though there are Apigenin supplements out there on the market, in the real world, you want to increase your intake of foods that contain Apigenin, but also other things, like they gave it with the green tea. But the amount of EGCG was minuscule, and we have to accept the fact that we don't have the data that we would like to have always. That's the reality, and we have to make a decision as individuals, you and I, and everybody watching this video, and the scientific community. There has to be a decision made because if you have cancer, or like me, if you're trying to ward off a recurrence of the cancer, you have a choice. Do I include this in my diet? Am I convinced by this data? Now, I chose those two studies to talk about for the video, but if you put in the words Apigenin and cancer into PubMed, which is this enormous repository of 35 million journal articles run by the US government, National Library of Medicine, you come up with 1,331 results.
Oh, really?
And that's what what the computer at the National Library of Medicine finds if you cross-reference the words Apigenin and cancer. If I just do the word Apigenin, there are 6,242 papers out there mentioning Apigenin. I just want to narrow that down to Apigenin and cancer, and I have my 1331. And none of these appeared, virtually none, maybe one, before the 1990s. And then it starts to excite interest. And then uh, basically 2017, there were 105 such papers. And then 2021 and 2022, well over 100. And I'll just quickly read you the titles of some recent ones. Apigenin in cancer therapy, from mechanism of action to nanotherapeutic agent, that's coming out of China. The therapeutic potential of Apigenin, which is another review article coming with a lot of authors coming mostly out of Iran and Italy, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read you 1,300 titles, but they're there. So it isn't rationalizing the therapeutic potential of Apigenin against cancer, Apigenin in cancer therapy, Apigenin as an anti-cancer agent, anti-cancer potential of Apigenin via immunoregulation. So there's a, I would say, pretty enormous community of people around the world who are interested in this. But if you go now, and you can do this easily in PubMed, now let's specify randomized control trials. And you come up with two results, and neither of them is really to the point. Two randomized control trials out of 1,331 papers, most of which are highly, highly positive. That's the valley of death. That's what you're seeing there,
Mhm.
the death of promising natural treatments.
Well, it doesn't sound like death to me. This sounds like there's a lot of interest, and people are
Yeah,
going about it in the ways that they can study it
yeah.
without having to spend $1 billion. Well, I think that sounds all very encouraging, and it doesn't sound to me as though there's any real downside to adding parsley into one's diet. In other of these natural products that we've discussed, there have been adjuvants. In other words, other natural agents that, when combined with something, enhance, create a synergy. And do you know of anything that is an adjuvant for parsley?
Other things that work somewhat similarly to that, like tofu, like broccoli, like turmeric, and certainly green tea and olive oil. I see no reason not to. My gut instinct is that these would synergize well, because there's always a little bit of difference in how these things work. If I were to be using this in the way that it was used in the German clinical trial, I certainly would be taking green tea in some form during the day.
Now, you mentioned the term flavonoids. Is apigenin a flavonoid?
Yes. A flavonoid is a product extracted from plants, and they're found in several different parts of the plants. They're used by the vegetables for their growth and for defense from injury. These are commonly consumed in the human diet. Actually, the existence of the flavonoids was first discovered by my mentor. You know who that was.
I do. Albert St. Georgi,
Correct.
Nobel Prize winner, discoverer of vitamin C.
Correct.
Oh,
St. Georgi and his co-workers uh, discovered that vitamin C taken alone was not as effective at preventing scurvy as a crude yellow extract from oranges, lemons, or paprika. You remember he was working in Szeged, Hungary, which is a center for paprika production. So he discovered vitamin C actually in paprika. And the increased activity of the extract, they called that vitamin P, but it wasn't a vitamin per se. It was something also present that had a beneficial effect. It didn't fulfill all the criteria of a vitamin, so that name was dropped, but they're now called flavonoids. So they're a class of plant compounds found in a wide variety of foods, including grapefruits and tea, for instance, tarragon, and they fulfill many different functions.
if parsley contains flavonoids, and flavonoids are known to have health value, are
Hmm.
there studies specifically around flavonoids and cancer that we could be and should be looking at?
Sure. And they are. Yeah, these are widely studied but you'd find them under studies of parsley, onions, blueberries, black tea, green tea. You'd find them all, all throughout the scientific literature. I don't know how many, but there's many thousands of studies, basically. It's just a general principle within the scientific study of these wonderful and promising food elements is that we can demonstrate that populations that eat a lot of the foods in question have lower rates of cancer. But when you try to reduce that down to one element or two elements, you don't get the same degree of anti-cancer activity as you do when you use the whole food. Supplements have their place, but I would just say, as a general rule, when you're talking about how do I prevent cancer from recurring or how do I prevent it in the first place, the diet should be the basis of your approach, of your home approach. The supplements only come in secondarily.
Well, thanks for that summary of the value of Apigenin and parsley. And I think it's fair to say that it's in a way, sort of an easy add into one's anti cancer approach to their own diet and to health in general. Well, for now, for the Moss Report, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today? Thank you for watching. We really appreciate all of the support. Please leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, and visit themossreport.com. We wish you all the best for health and healing.